it? Any trends? Hi guys. Hey.
Increased, and it was weird because the max didn't increase, the average did. So that was kind of weird.
I'll have to have a look at your data and see.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. He had a super good job in the first one, it was really high, and the other ones in the second trial were just, they're good, but they weren't like.
As the research goes,
Yeah.
in a larger project, you hope that more participants kind of balances everything out. So pilot, you're just kind of working out all the kinks.
Yeah, I don't know how I'm gonna do the actual statistics on it, but.
Well, for the pilot, more or less just mean the standard deviations. That's good. So. How's your caffeine study going? Good. Oh, the informed consent. Okay. Well, that was, for this class, that's just practice. You don't have to do it. For your thesis, you will. So,
And I got up and I was like,
Yep.
I thought that was like 5:30.
all right, so it is time to start. So I do need to collect your chapter 11 assignment if you haven't already emailed that. So I'll go down and collect that. Thank you. Thank you. Just email it, guys, if you haven't got it. Got yours on the email? Okay. So I do have another assignment for you. This one will be due on Tuesday. This one has to do with what we're talking about. This one will be due on Thursday. This has to do with what we're talking about today. So just a short little assignment to reinforce what we talk about with physical activity epidemiology today. This is posted in today's folder, and I'll give you a copy before you leave today. So the plan for today is to talk about physical activity epidemiology. This is chapter 17 of your textbook, and the plan for Thursday is to have a review for the exam. The next exam is over chapters 9 and 11. And then next Tuesday is exam 3 over chapters 9 and 11. It's open note. I suggest don't miss out on Thursday because those are important materials that'll help you with the exam. The following Thursday is mini spring break. Then we come back, we have a couple of work days, Tuesday, Thursday, to get ready for presentations, and the following week we start presentations. So that's kind of the outline for the next couple weeks. And then final exam, and then all done. So epidemiology. This is one area that I have a lot of interest. When I was in graduate school at Arizona State, had an epidemiology class, and we had to write a lit review for that class. And I decided to turn my lit review into a published article. So my instructor at Arizona State for epidemiology was Katrine Tuderlock. She works at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta now, so she left ASU and is in Georgia. I was interested in strength, and so the relationship with strength and disease and mortality. So this was published back in 2005. So we're going to talk about all different types of fitness variables in the relationship with disease conditions and mortality today. So the physical activity PowerPoint is in the folder for today. And specifically, we're going to talk about the importance of physical activity and how that influences health and mortality, especially in today's world. Okay, so how do we define epidemiology? So two things, the distribution and determinants of health-related states or events in specified populations, and the application of this study to the control of health problems. So we look at the distribution, so the frequency of health conditions, and the relationship to physical activity and other health-related behaviors, and also the determinants. So what might be associated with these disease conditions? How can we change these disease conditions by physical activity or other behaviors? So it's important that we report disease rates accurately, and there's two common methods of doing this. The first one has to do with person years, is one way of reporting frequency of disease or other conditions. So disease or mortality rates in cohort studies often expressed relative to person years. So what's a person year? That's defined as 1 year of observation for one person during a follow-up period. So every single person in the study, as the years pass and they continue with the follow-up period, every time a year passes and that person is still in the study, that's one person year. So participants' person year contribution to the cohort. A cohort is the sample. So that's the group of people that is enrolled in a study. Begins when they enter the follow-up period. So as soon as they enter the follow-up period, the clock starts, and then you're measuring person years. Okay, so the follow-up period ends when they have an event. So when they develop a certain condition, or they're lost for the follow-up, unfortunately due to death, or when the follow-up period formally ends. So when the study comes to an end. So that's the first way of reporting distribution. The other way is through the relative risk. So this is sometimes called a hazard ratio. So it's calculated as the ratio of prevalence of a disease in one group versus a reference group. So the reference group, you might say, is the ideal group. So this would be the group that has no risk factors, no other health conditions. This is the group that you're comparing everyone else to that may have a certain health condition. So the null value or no effect of a relative risk is 1.0. So that's the optimal group to be in, is the 1.0 group. So everyone else that has a relative risk or hazard ratio greater than 1 has an increased risk of a condition. So if our reference group is 1.0 and we have another group that has a relative risk of, say, 3.0, that means that that group has 3 times the risk of developing a certain health condition versus the reference group. So the reference group is what we all want to be. That's the ideal, nice and healthy. But as the relative risk ratio goes up, the risk for that condition multiplies. Conversely, if the relative risk is less than 1, that means the risk for a certain condition is decreased. So there's less risk of developing a certain health condition. So let's take some examples here. So there is a strong link between physical activity and a decreased risk of these cancers. So you can see a decreased risk. That would be a relative risk less than 1, reducing risk. There is a strong link between body fatness and increased risk of these cancers. So you can see this would be in cases where the relative risk is greater than 1 for increased risk. Okay, so landmark study in epidemiology came from the Aerobic Center in Dallas, Texas. When I was an undergraduate student, I did a 3-month internship at the Aerobic Center in Dallas, Texas, and got to meet some of the prominent researchers in this area. So a lot of this stuff is taken from Stephen Blair, who used to work at the Aerobics Center. So this is looking at cardiovascular disease mortality rates. So death from cardiovascular disease based on cardiorespiratory fitness. And so this part of the Aerobic Center longitudinal study involved over 7,000 women and over 25,000 men. So that's a lot. So ACLS stands for the Aerobic Center Longitudinal Study. So they're following these people over long periods of time. And at the Aerobic Center, what happens is every year, people that are enrolled in this study come back for an annual assessment. So it's a comprehensive health assessment. So these people at the Aerobic Center are collecting all this data on an annual basis that they're able to generate these relationships between different variables like cardiorespiratory fitness and mortality and other disease conditions. So what we're seeing is that in all these thousands of men and women, there's a connection between cardiorespiratory fitness. How do we define cardiorespiratory fitness? Exercise physiology students, what's our criterion measure? How do you know if you're fit from a cardiorespiratory standpoint? What's the overall measure? VO2. Yeah, that's an objective measure of cardiorespiratory fitness. So that's exactly what they did in these thousands of people. It was a treadmill test. I don't think it was the Bruce protocol, but something modified, maybe more of a walking protocol with, in some way. There's lots of protocols, but I don't think they used the Bruce protocol there. So anyway, what they found is deaths per 10,000 person years. So that's just a way of describing the frequency of mortality based on cardiorespiratory fitness. So in the women, the low cardiorespiratory fitness, as you might expect, had the highest mortality rate, moderate, and high. In the men, we see a similar type of relationship, low, moderate, and high. Okay, now the next question. The distance between categories, is it the same? No, it's not. So we can see that the greatest reduction in risk comes in going from a low cardiorespiratory fitness category to a moderate. So there's a little bit more risk reduction in going from the moderate to high category, but it's not that much. So what is the message? What is the frontline message if you're a practitioner working with the general population? We're not talking about athletes, we're talking about just regular people. What's the message? Do they need to be like Bryant in order to experience health benefits? No, they don't. Okay, Bryant is in this group. So Bryant's got a lot of risk reduction just because he spends a lot of time working on this characteristic. But for all the rest of us, if we can just go from this category to this category, there's a lot of risk reduction. Most of the risk reduction comes in going from this category to moderate. So how do we achieve a moderate level of cardiorespiratory fitness? It's probably just 2 or 3 good workouts a week. It's not a question of just spending every day, hours a day, trying to get that 5K record. It's different So it's more of a health-related goal versus a performance-related goal is the key. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. This is an interesting graph because there's 3 different axes on this one. This one shows the deaths per 10,000 person years. So that's just the frequency of how often something takes place. In this case, mortality. In addition to cardiorespiratory fitness, we're looking at different risk factors. Okay, so risk factor number 1, current smoking, yes or no? Risk factor number 2, systolic blood pressure, greater than 140 millimeters of mercury. Risk factor number 3, cholesterol, greater than or equal to 240 milligrams per deciliter. So these are 3 of the common primary risk factors. And then looking at that relationship with number of risk factors with cardiorespiratory fitness. So what we've got are 0 risk factors. This is your reference group here. High cardiorespiratory fitness with 0 risk factors. So they don't smoke, they have normal blood pressure, they have normal cholesterol, and they have high cardiorespiratory fitness. It's just like Bryant. Bryant is this cube right here. So 0 risk factors and moderate. You notice it's about the same in terms of mortality risk, just all of these is a no, and then moderate, you have about the same relative risk. And then 0 risk factors but low cardiorespiratory fitness. So not doing much in terms of activity, but they also practice healthy behaviors like not smoking, and their blood pressure is normal and their cholesterol is normal. Okay, so the point with all this is I want to show you the protective effect of physical activity. So if you're someone that happens to smoke and have high blood pressure or high blood cholesterol, so we're looking at 2 or 3 of these risk factors, but in addition, you have high cardiorespiratory fitness. So we're looking at this purple square right back here. I want you to compare the relative risk, deaths per 10,000 person years. So this is 10 deaths per 10,000 person years, 20 deaths per 10,000 person years, 30, 40, 50, and so on, and 60 up here. So this is, it looks like about 23 or 22 deaths per 10,000 person years. And then I want you to compare that with this group over here. No risk factors, but low cardiorespiratory fitness. So they're sitting about 30 deaths per 10,000 person years. So can you see this square versus this square? This square, despite having 2 or 3 risk factors, they have this higher cardiorespiratory fitness and they have a lower rate of mortality. So closer to 20 deaths per 10,000 person years versus 30 deaths per 10,000 person years. Now, does that mean I want you to go out and start smoking and eat really poor food so you get your blood pressure and cholesterol? No, what I'm saying is that despite risk factors that might be present, hopefully they're not, but if they are, if we're working on our fitness, we can prevent mortality. So there's a reduced risk of mortality in this case. So physical activity is really, really important. What if we don't like to be on a treadmill? What if we don't really like cardiorespiratory type activities? How many know people that hate aerobic activity? Is there other things that we can do to reduce our risk? Yeah. Okay, so what if we like strength training instead? This is part of that same study, the aerobic centered longitudinal study. They looked at bench press and leg press strength and deaths per 10,000 person years. Do you notice anything similar about the way this is structured? So go back a couple slides. Notice that relationship, low, moderate, high. Notice the similarity? Okay. So where are we getting the best benefit? Now I'll use Jordan. So Jordan is this square right here. Okay, but do we all need to be just like Jordan to get the health benefits? We're talking health, not performance. The biggest jump is going from low strength to moderate strength. And of course we get a little more when we go from here to here. Okay, if we have the time to devote to it like Jordan does, yeah, we can get a little bit more health benefit going from moderate to high. But what's the biggest barrier for the general population for regular exercise? It's time, right? So we don't have to reach this elite category of strength to get the health benefits. If we have the time to put into it, yeah, you can get a little bit more health benefit, but the biggest jump is going from low to moderate. Okay, so interesting. This is a more recent study looking at attributable fractions. So looking at the number of people in a study and taking the percentage of mortality due to different factors. So the darker bars are men, the clear bars are women, and low cardiorespiratory fitness was the number one factor, number one attributable factor for mortality. So out of these thousands of people, we're looking at 40,000, almost 41,000 men, and we're looking at almost 13,000 women that were examined as part of this study. And we're saying that in both men and women, low cardiorespiratory fitness, independent of everything else, accounted for over at 16% or more of mortality. So they can take this data and they can throw everything aside and just look at the independent effect of each of these things. So low cardiorespiratory fitness was the most important factor. So if you don't like aerobic exercise, you at least need to do a little bit because that's important. That's the number one thing, cardiorespiratory fitness. Do enough to get you in that moderate category. Obesity was way down here. Smoking was the second one for women. Hypertension was the second one for men, and the third for women. So if we're doing exercise to improve our cardiorespiratory fitness, guess what tends to happen with high blood pressure? Tends to improve as well. So very important, cardiorespiratory fitness is important for our health. Okay, so this is the next study. This was produced not too long ago. 2016 was when this came out. So let me explain. In this graph, we're looking at cardiovascular disease events. Over here, we're looking at all-cause mortality. So this is looking at activity level and also strength together. So looking at groups with high strength, middle strength, and low strength. So you can see the colors here. Low strength, middle strength, and high strength. The next thing is within each of these categories, you have quintiles. What does that mean? Quintiles means how many? 5, right? So this describes how active people were. So Q5 represents highly active individuals and Q1 represents highly inactive individuals. So we're talking about individuals with high strength that are highly active down to individuals with high strength that have low activity. Does everybody follow me here with this? So same thing here, middle strength, highly active, inactive, low strength, but highly active and inactive. sensitive board here. Okay, so the hazard ratio, that's the relative risk. So remember, what's our reference value with relative risk? It's 1, right? So anything above 1 represents what? Increased or decreased risk? Increased risk. Anything below 1 represents decreased risk. So this is just the more cardiovascular disease events and mortality. Okay. So let's take a look at the low strength group. So low strength group, everybody in this group, Q1 through Q5, has low amounts of muscle strength. So then we look at what happens with the hazard ratio as they go from being low strength inactive to low strength highly active. So what's the trend here? Everyone has low strength in this group. The difference is not active to highly active. What's happening with the risk? It's decreasing, which means what? So in the presence of low strength, we can reduce our risk just by being more active. Same thing, you kind of see the same trend with mortality, which is risk of death. Okay, so everybody here has low strength, but the ones that are progressing towards the Q5 group, the highly active group, that's the ones that have less risk. Okay, so middle, let's forward over here to the high strength group. How is the high strength group different between the Q5 and Q1 versus the low strength from Q5 to Q1? What difference are you noting there? Is there a difference in hazard ratio between high strength, not very active, versus high strength, highly active? Not much. So what does that suggest? If you're strong, that's a good thing, right? That's a good thing. So being strong is good, independent of activity level. For other reasons, for other health conditions, high blood pressure especially, it would be good even if you have high strength to be in the Q5 highly active group as well. So the same thing is kind of noted over here, although the Q1 has a slight increased risk versus the high strength highly active group over here. So at this point in the presentation, cardiorespiratory fitness and having good musculoskeletal strength, both of these things are important to reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease as well as early mortality. Okay, so something else I want to emphasize, benefits of cardiorespiratory fitness for individuals of any size. So I think in our culture, we're obsessed with size. I think the more important question, understanding that everybody's different, is our behavior. So our activity level. Because we can have some awesome health benefits, and we can live longer and have successful aging, no matter what our size, if we practice healthy behaviors like being physically active. Let me show you what I mean. So this is another used by permission from Stephen Blair. So waist circumference measurements. Hi, Shelby. Were taken in 14,043 men. Okay, the relative risk was adjusted. That means looking at fitness level independent of age, examination year, smoking, alcohol intake, parental history of cardiovascular disease. And so the lowest quintile of oxygen uptake in each group were classified as physically unfit. All others were classified as physically fit. Okay, so let's take the group with the highest waist circumference, so greater than 99 centimeters, looking at fit versus unfit, and the relative risk over here. Okay, so what I want you to show here is 1 is our baseline, right? Okay, so this is a group. Everybody in this group had a waist circumference greater than 99 centimeters. The fit group here had the same relative risk as the group over here that had low waist circumference that were fit. Can you see how this and this are about the same? Okay, so the second thing I want to point out is that the unfit with a high waist circumference had almost 2.5 times the risk of mortality versus those in the fit group. So again, what this suggests is we need to stop the obsession with body size and focus more on behavior. So our quality of life and our longevity can improve simply by just working on our fitness. Okay, now, is there a benefit to losing weight? Yes, there is, because lots of weight places what kind of stress on our joints. Okay, so there can be some orthopedic problems associated with carrying extra weight, but in terms of just improving our fitness, I think that needs to be the focus more than just reducing body size. Okay, so interesting graph here. The y-axis, number of deaths per 100,000 people. Okay, this was in 1900. So looking at the fractions of people and the causes of death. So in 1900, the number one cause of death was pneumonia or influenza. Fast forward to 2010, guess what the number one cause of death is? Heart disease. What's changed? Anything changed since then? A few things. Yeah. Okay, number 2 is cancer. Number 3 is stroke. Let's see, 2 was tuberculosis, 3 was gastrointestinal infections. So why were people getting heart disease back then? Heart disease was, I guess it was number 4, but it wasn't number 1. What's the difference? What were people doing more on a daily basis back in 1900? Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. So it's like my grandfather, who's passed away now, but he was an old farmer, and he used to tell me, why do you need to go to the gym? Just come out with me for a day. And I did several days, digging post holes and all kinds of great stuff. And I'll tell you what, it's a great workout. And so you can see why people had lower frequency of stroke and heart disease back then. They were laboring more, they were more active, walking more versus riding in cars. How many have seen this movie? I think this is kind of a statement on what, a little bit exaggerated about what our culture is like today. So we need to change that. So you guys are all going to be on the front lines of helping people because not everybody likes to exercise. We need to help people find time in their lives to do that. It's important, all the way from childhood through adulthood, we see this vicious physical inactivity cycle. Physically inactive children, we live in a world now where 30% are classified as obese. Misses school 2 days higher than average, lower test scores, $2,741 per year higher healthcare costs, 1 week per year of extra sick days taken, 5.3 million premature deaths per year due to inactivity. Preschoolers with inactive parents are far less likely to be active as adults, so there's a greater risk going all the way through to be obese as adults. So we need to change this cycle, and again, I think it's more about changing behavior. Again, not focusing so much on body size, but more on just being more active. So how many of you know what the physical activity guidelines are? So as an HHP major, I think you ought to know and we ought to review it. So back in the 1970s is when all of this started on physical activity guidelines for Americans. The initial emphasis because a lot of these scientists were trained endurance athletes. The initial emphasis was on structured endurance training to develop cardiorespiratory fitness. It was thought that structured training leads to cardiorespiratory fitness, which is absolutely true. And so the 1970s, we had what we call the jogging craze. So this is July 4th, 1977, People magazine, emphasizing how everybody was out jogging, which is great, Frank Shorter in 1972 in Munich won the Olympic marathon, which is great. I think his time was like 2 hours and 10 minutes, so he was a pretty good runner. So the guidelines reflected that. 1972 American Heart Association, notice how structured it is. 75% of maximal heart rate, 3 days a week, 15 to 20 minutes per session. So not much different than the current ACSM guidelines, which are 3 to 5 days a week, 60 to 90% of maximal heart rate, 20 minutes a session. 1973, the YMCA came out with some guidelines, 80% of VO2 max, 3 days a week, 40 to 45 minutes. This is pretty impractical though, because we really don't know, in a practical setting, you really can't measure VO2 max, your percentage. Heart rate's a little easier to do. 1975, ACSM, so the first appearance of the American College of Sports Medicine, 70-90% of VO2 max. Again, kind of impractical, but 3 to 5 days a week, 20 to 45 minutes a session. Okay, so beginning in the 1980s through the early 2000s, we had a changing paradigm in our physical activity guidelines. So we started to realize that the quantity and quality of exercise to get health-related benefits was a lot different than what people need to do for physical fitness or performance related benefits. So it was kind of a change in paradigm where people are saying, okay, if I'm more active, regardless of intensity, so we're talking about activities of daily living, parking your car further away from a building, taking the stairs and so on, leads to better health. And the evidence was there to back that up. So the results from large epidemiological studies showed most health and longevity benefits achieved in going from low to moderate levels of cardiorespiratory fitness. So that's a lot different than just trying to achieve the highest VO2 max possible. So the overall message changed. The public health message is that we don't need to train like a world-class athlete to reap the majority of health-related benefits. So anybody know who this is? Galen Rupp, so currently holds the American record in the 10,000 meters, I think 26 minutes and about 30 seconds, I think, around there. This is Shalane Flanagan, also a record holder, but I'm not sure which one. I think she medaled in one of the Olympics, I think. So amazing athletes, and it's great to look up to people like this, but for health-related benefits, we just need to kind of take a realistic expectation and just do something, because something is better than nothing. Okay, so I want you to notice how the guidelines changed here. 1992, American Heart Association declared physical inactivity as a primary risk factor for heart disease. 1995 and 96. So I remember when this happened, it was kind of a big deal. ACSM, CDC, Surgeon General partnered up and came out with this joint statement on physical activity for Americans. So 30 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity, a minimum of 5 days per week. 1995-96, that was what was recommended. So that's equivalent to 1.5 miles at a pace of about 3.5 miles per hour. So kind of just a brisk walk, but conversational pace. 2002, Institute of Medicine, they came out with guidelines that suggested 60 minutes of daily moderate intensity physical activity. And I remember when this happened, because then everyone was confused. They were like, well, what about this one that we just heard 6 years prior to that? The emphasis with this one was more on weight maintenance or weight loss versus just general health benefits. So the longer duration was for the purpose of weight management, was the difference. Okay, so working our way up, 2007, ACSM added to the previous guideline of 30 minutes, 5 days a week, to now vigorous activity, 3 days a week. So if 30 minutes, moderate intensity, 5 days a week isn't working, you can do 3 days a week for shorter duration, but now exercise with more intensity. They also added muscle strengthening 2 days a week. They also suggested that for health benefits, the bouts need to be 10 minutes continuous in duration without a pause. So at least 10 minutes. Okay, so a year later, 2008, first edition of Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans. This was put out by the Center for Disease Control. 150 minutes of moderate intensity. So if you say 5 days a week times 30 minutes, what do you get? 150 minutes, right? Or if you prefer vigorous intensity, so if you're someone that just likes to go out and get it done, 75 minutes. So cut that in half if it's vigorous intensity. Bouts had to be at least 10 minutes, still muscle strengthening twice a week. 2018, this is the very last one. So overhaul of the physical activity guidelines for Americans. After the 2008, we watched for about 10 years, and guess what? Was it working? Nope, it wasn't working. So we have to modify things a little bit more. So here's what happened in 2018. Elimination of the requirements for physical activity for adults to occur in bouts of at least 10 minutes. So what are we saying? Here's a direct quote from those 2018 guidelines. Adults should move more and sit less throughout the day. So now we're saying, forget about the 10 minutes continuous. We just want you to get up every once in a while and move around is basically what they were saying. It seemed like reading this whole statement and talking with some people back at Arizona State that were kind of in on this discussion, there was a little bit of frustration. So we're just saying, just get up and move. Some physical activity is better than none. Adults who sit less and do any amount of moderate to vigorous physical activity gain some health benefits. So now the CDC is just begging Americans to get up and move more, is the new guideline. Okay, so move your way. This was the campaign from the Center for Disease Control from 2018. More independence in how we choose our physical activity. So how much activity do adults need? At least 150 minutes a week. 150 minutes per week. So you divide that by 7 and you get how much you need per day, or you can do any combination of days. Muscle strengthening activities are also in there for health-related benefits, at least twice a week. So if you prefer vigorous intensity aerobic activity, down here, aim for at least 75 minutes per week. There's other countries that are looking at what we're doing and kind of following the same path. This comes from Finland. And versus this, I kind of like the way that they structured this over in Finland. So right in the center of this circle is muscle strengthening and balance training, so at least twice a week. So they provide some suggestions in there. So you have to understand, we're talking about the general population. So we're not talking about people that are in the HHP field. Just talking about the average person that doesn't really know much, but knows it's good for them, knows they need to do it, but they're wondering about how to go about it. So strength training, sequence training, balance training, ball games, skating, stretching, dancing, aerobics. So lots of suggestions. Looking at here, 2 hours and 30 minutes a week. So that's 2 hours is 120 minutes plus 30 is 150. So this is moderate intensity. Notice the word here, moderate. So berry picking, fishing, hunting. I'll go for that, right, Brian? Heavy house and yard work. Okay, so look at all these options. So we're telling the general population you don't necessarily need a gym membership. Look around your house, just get up and get active. Cycling, walking, Nordic, what's Nordic walking? Is that cross-country skiing maybe?
Well, they have cross-country skiing down there.
Oh, okay. Nordic walking.
The snowshoeing maybe?
Yeah, with something in Finland. Everyday physical activities, commuting to work, that'd be bicycling maybe to work, physically active games. And then if you choose, you can do the vigorous approach here, hour and 15 minutes, so that's 75 minutes a week. Cycling, running, cross-country skiing, racket games, running ball games, Nordic walking, stairs, hill climbing, fitness swimming, water running, aerobics. So just trying to emphasize all these options. Yeah.
This is, going back to the Nordic walking, because I was curious, it's walking basically just with like hiking poles.
Okay.
So just to get your arms moving at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I've never seen someone doing that, but I can kind of picture it.
It says it has a Finnish origin, total body version of walking that can be done by both non-athletes as a help promoting physical activity. This
Awesome.
activity is performed with specially designed walking poles similar to ski poles.
Awesome. So the Finnish people have the right message. Okay. So this is where we engage. Practice activity. So what I'd like you to do, we're going to practice using the CDC website. And the question that I want you to answer, based on the most recent data from the Center for Disease Control in 2019, what percentage of adults in Montana meet the current physical activity guidelines? Let's find out. So I've got several steps there for you. Let's go out here. And if you're able, you can just click on that link, www.cdc.gov, right up here at the top of that slide. It'll take you right to it. So Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So let me know, everybody, show of hands if you've found it, got it. So there's a wealth of information here about physical activity and health behaviors. So let's go under healthy living. And you see several things there. Let's go to overweight and obesity. So you just click on that one. Okay, so you'll get to this screen and I want you to scroll down. See on the left here, Division of Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Obesity at the CDC. You can see several choices there. What we want to look at is physical activity. So I want you to click on the lower left. So once you're at this screen on overweight and obesity, you'll scroll down and just click on physical activity here. from here, what I want you to do is click on Data and Statistics. So, am I going too fast? Okay, all right, so let's go to Data and Statistics. And what we want is the data trends and maps. So, you ever hear on the news different stats quoted about physical activity and behavior and stuff? A lot of it comes right from this website because it's updated all the time. So click on the data trends and maps, and you come to this. And I want you to go over here, explore by indicator. You can go to physical activity. And from here, let's go with physical activity behavior. So you want physical activity behavior, and you can click on go. It'll take a moment to come up. So right now the indicator in there is adults who usually walk or bike to work. Let's go with adults that meet aerobic and muscle strengthening guidelines. So again, the aerobic guidelines, 150 minutes of moderate, 75 minutes of vigorous, and then at least 2 days of muscle strengthening. So you can click on that indicator, and the map will change. And then you can get the percentage of over to Montana. So we're doing pretty good. So you can see, based on their available data, 25 to 28.5% of adults are currently meeting that current physical activity guideline of aerobic and muscle strengthening. So you can see some of the other states there. Colorado's kind of known as the fittest state in the United States. Everyone there is really in good shape, it seems like. But we're holding our own up here in Montana, so that's good. So I encourage you, you can find all kinds of stuff about nutrition and things on this website. So you can explore it on your own. But I wanted to wrap up with just a summary. So physical inactivity and low cardiorespiratory fitness are prominent risk factors for mortality as well as lots of disease conditions, especially cardiovascular disease. Being more physically active and expending energy is a special part of the culture that we live in, and we need to do more of it. So encourage you 30 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity most days of the week. If you don't have all days of the week, then vigorous activity at least 3 days a week. You can get additional benefits by achieving higher levels of VO2 as well as participating in muscle strength exercises. Intermittent bursts throughout the day. So it doesn't need to be 10 minutes continuous, just after this class, go over and run up the stairs to the Liberal Arts Building. That counts and can give you significant health benefits. So are there any questions? Okay, so what I want you to do, just to reinforce what we've talked about today, this is a short assignment, and it will be due on Tuesday. You can find this assignment posted under the folder for this week. So what are we doing on Thursday? Yep, review for exam. Please don't miss out on that because that will help you in doing well on the exam. How many of you have your data collection scheduled or going? Okay. Brian, 3:30 tomorrow, right? Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, that's all I have for today, everybody. Hope you have a good rest of your day.